We'd been searching for the perfect home for months, and when we stumbled upon the old mansion at the edge of town, it felt like destiny. The grand estate, with its ivy-clad facade and towering spires, seemed to promise a new beginning. The realtor was eager to sell, which should have been a red flag, but the price was too good to ignore. We signed the papers on a chilly October afternoon, blissfully unaware of what awaited us. Our first night in the mansion was unsettling. The house groaned with the weight of age, and the wind rattled the old shutters. As we settled into our new home, my wife Emily and I noticed something peculiar. The mansion seemed alive. Its walls seemed to whisper. At first we dismissed it as the house settling, or the wind playing tricks. But the murmurs grew clearer as night fell. It began softly, like a distant conversation, but soon the whispers were unmistakable. They seemed to come from every corner, swirling around us, their cadence both soothing and sinister. "Help us," one voice would moan, while another would hiss, "You shouldn't have come." Emily and I exchanged nervous glances. The whispers grew louder as the night wore on, becoming a cacophony of disembodied voices. Unable to sleep, I wandered through the mansion, hoping to find the source of the sounds. The grand hall was dark and empty, the shadows dancing eerily on the walls. The air was thick with a cold, musty scent, and the floorboards creaked underfoot. The whispers seemed to follow me, growing more insistent with every step. "Come closer," they beckoned. "We're waiting." The mansion's layout was confusing, with winding corridors and hidden alcoves. I stumbled upon a door that was slightly ajar, leading to a dusty old library. The air inside was stale, filled with the scent of forgotten pages. I flicked on the light, revealing rows of ancient books and cobweb-covered shelves. The whispers grew louder, more distinct. "Find the truth," they urged. Curiosity piqued. I began to explore the library, pulling books from the shelves and examining their spines. One book fell open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, I found a faded journal. The handwriting was shaky and uneven, as though the writer had been in a hurry or under duress. The entries were cryptic, recounting strange occurrences and terrifying experiences. "The walls listen," one entry read, "and they remember." As I read, a cold shiver ran down my spine. The entries detailed a series of unsettling events that had plagued the mansion's previous occupants: disappearances, madness, and a lingering sense of dread. The final entry was a desperate plea. "They are restless. They demand something from us. We must leave before it's too late." I closed the journal, feeling a growing sense of unease. The whispers seemed to grow louder, more demanding. Emily's voice called out from the hallway, breaking my reverie. "Are you okay? I thought I heard you talking." I quickly stashed the journal and headed back to the main room. Emily looked worried, her eyes searching mine for answers. "I'm fine," I said, though the words felt hollow. "Just a bit of noise from the house. I think we need to find out more about its history." Emily nodded, though her unease was evident. Little did we know, our decision to uncover the mansion's secrets would lead us down a path of terror we could never have imagined. As we prepared for bed, the whispers continued their relentless chant, promising that the worst was yet to come. Sleep was elusive that night. The whispers from the walls persisted, and the shadows seemed to move on their own. Emily and I lay in bed, each of us too unsettled to speak. Every creak of the old house sounded amplified in the silence, and the oppressive atmosphere seemed to press down on us. By morning, we resolved to delve deeper into the mansion's past. We returned to the library, determined to uncover any remaining clues. As I entered the room, the eerie chill of the previous night still lingered, and the whispering had ceased, replaced by an unsettling silence. Emily and I began examining the shelves more thoroughly, pulling books and scrutinizing their contents. The journal's warning had left us both anxious, and every creak of the floorboards felt like a prelude to something terrible. We were so absorbed in our search that we barely noticed the subtle shift in the air. Without warning, a sudden gust of wind, an impossibility in the sealed library, blew through the room. Books began to tremble on their shelves as if stirred by an invisible force. Emily and I exchanged alarmed glances, and before we could react, the shelves started to buckle. The entire structure groaned and creaked under an unseen pressure. "Watch out!" I shouted, but it was too late. Books began to topple one by one, cascading to the floor in a chaotic storm of paper and dust. The room was engulfed in a whirlwind of literary debris. We ducked and shielded our heads as volumes flew past us, some hitting the walls with a loud thud. In the midst of the chaos, one of the shelves gave way entirely, crashing to the ground and sending a tidal wave of books across the room. Emily was thrown back by the force of the impact, and I struggled to regain my balance amidst the avalanche of fallen literature. Once the dust settled, the library was a disaster. Books lay scattered across the floor, their covers bent and pages torn. The once pristine shelves were now in ruins, and the library's eerie calm had returned, though it felt more ominous than ever. What the hell just happened? Emily's voice was shaky as she tried to collect herself. I don't know, I replied, my own voice trembling. It's like the house didn't want us to find something. We began to pick up the scattered books, trying to salvage anything that might be important. As I reached for a particularly old and ornate volume, I noticed that its cover was intricately engraved with symbols that matched the markings from the journal. My heart raced as I carefully opened it. The pages were filled with strange diagrams and cryptic texts, written in a language I couldn't decipher. Emily and I continued to sort through the debris, and as we did, we noticed something odd. The whispers had returned, but this time they were more urgent, almost pleading. Help us, they seemed to say, before it's too late. The atmosphere in the library grew heavier, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The symbols in the book seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the mansion was alive and watching us, its walls closing in on us with every passing moment. As we worked, the feeling of being watched intensified. Shadows seemed to move independently of any light source, and the whispers became louder, more insistent. The library, once a place of potential discovery, now felt like a prison. What are we going to do? Emily's voice was barely a whisper. I don't know, I said, my mind racing, but we need to figure this out. Whatever is happening here, it's not going to stop until we uncover the truth. The sense of urgency grew as the whispers became a relentless drone, demanding answers, demanding action. The mansion's dark history was unraveling before us, and the walls seemed to close in, the echoes of their whispers growing ever more ominous. After the chaos in the library, Emily and I were on edge. The whispers, now more urgent, seemed to echo through every room of the mansion, but we could no longer ignore them. We needed answers. Our search led us to investigate the mansion's layout more thoroughly. We had barely scratched the surface of its many rooms and corridors. As we explored, we noticed something peculiar. Many of the doors and passageways were locked or concealed behind heavy drapes and old furniture. While searching the second floor, I discovered a door that had previously escaped our notice. It was hidden behind a large ornate tapestry depicting a serene landscape. The door itself was old and iron-bound, looking as though it hadn't been opened in decades. Emily and I exchanged a determined glance before I pushed the tapestry aside and tried the handle. It was locked. With a bit of effort, I managed to force the door open, revealing a narrow, dimly lit staircase leading downward. The air that wafted up was cold and musty, carrying the scent of mold and decay. The whispers seemed to grow louder, more insistent, urging us to descend. With a sense of foreboding, we made our way down the stairs. The darkness was almost tangible, and the only light came from the weak beam of my flashlight. The staircase twisted and turned, leading us deeper into the bowels of the mansion. Each step echoed eerily, and the whispers grew more frantic with every step we took. At the bottom of the stairs, we found ourselves in a large underground chamber. The room was vast and cavernous, with stone walls and a low ceiling. It was filled with old dusty furniture and remnants of what seemed to be long-abandoned experiments. Shelves lined the walls, holding strange and grotesque artifacts, some of which looked like they belonged in a macabre museum. The center of the room was dominated by an old stone altar. It was covered in strange symbols and inscriptions, and the air around it was thick with an oppressive energy. The whispers grew deafening as we approached the altar, their words a confusing mix of commands and pleas. "Release us," they cried. "We need it. The price must be paid." Emily and I were both transfixed by the altar. The symbols etched into its surface seemed to glow faintly in the darkness, pulsing with an eerie light. I noticed a small ornate box resting atop the altar, its lid intricately carved with the same symbols. It was locked with a heavy, rusted padlock. "What do you think is in there?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I replied, "but it's clear that whatever it is, it's important." With great effort, I pried the padlock open and lifted the lid. Inside was a collection of old yellowed documents and a small, tattered book. The book's cover was embossed with the same symbols we had seen earlier. I picked it up and began to leaf through its pages. The text was a mixture of ancient languages and symbols, difficult to decipher. As I examined the book, the whispers seemed to converge, their voices forming a single, coherent message. "You must complete the ritual," they chanted. "It's the only way to free us." Emily and I looked at each other, confusion and fear evident in our expressions. What ritual? And what did the voices mean by free us? As we tried to make sense of the book, the temperature in the room dropped suddenly. Our breath fogged in the cold air, and a feeling of icy dread settled over us. Shadows flickered at the edges of the room, moving as if alive. The whispers became a torrent of voices, each one more desperate than the last. Suddenly, the stone altar began to tremble, and the ground beneath us started to shift. The room seemed to warp and distort, as though reality itself was bending. The whispers reached a crescendo, their voices blending into a chilling, otherworldly scream. "We need to get out of here," Emily urged, her voice filled with panic. I nodded, shoving the book into my bag. As we hurried back up the stairs, the whispers continued to chase us, growing fainter as we ascended, but leaving an unsettling echo in our minds. We emerged back into the library, the destruction of the previous night still evident. The feeling of being watched never left us, and the sense of urgency grew. The mansion was not merely a home, it was a vessel for something dark and malevolent. The whispers had led us to the hidden chamber, but what lay ahead was still a mystery, and we had to find answers before it was too late. The oppressive atmosphere of the mansion weighed heavily on us as we tried to regain our composure. Emily and I were shaken by the events in the hidden chamber and the eerie whispers that seemed to be guiding or goading us. We knew we had to continue our investigation, but the dread was Al. We decided to explore more of the mansion's forgotten corners, hoping to uncover additional clues. The mansion's labyrinthine layout made our search challenging, but we were driven by a need to understand the malevolent forces at play. As we wandered through the dimly lit corridors, we noticed a door that had been partially obscured by a large, dusty curtain. It was slightly ajar, revealing a slive. Pushing the curtain aside, we entered a narrow hallway that seemed to lead to another hidden room. The door creaked open with a groan, and we stepped inside. The air was stale, and the room was illuminated only by the weak beam of my flashlight. As we adjusted our eyes to the gloom, we saw that the room was filled with a nauseating. The space was small and cramped, with walls lined by shelves and alcoves. But what caught our breath was the macabre display of human bones. Piles of skeletal remains were scattered throughout the room, their whiteness stark against the darkness. Skulls, rib cages, and femurs were arranged haphazardly, creating a gruesome and unsettling "Oh my God," Emily gasped, clutching my arm. "What is this place?" I could barely find the words. The room was a macabre gallery of death, the bones arranged with a chilling indifference. Some of the bones were displayed in grotesque patterns, as if trying to convey a message or ritual. Among the piles, we noticed strange symbols etched into the walls and floor, mirroring those we had seen on the altar. As we cautiously stepped further into the room, I spotted something that made my blood run cold. At the center of the room was a makeshift altar, similar to the one in the hidden chamber, but much smaller and more rudimentary. On it lay a large, weathered book, its cover covered in the same disturbing symbols. Emily approached the book with trembling hands. "Do you think this is another journal?" she asked, her voice quavering. I nodded, though my own hands shook as I reached for the book. As I opened it, the pages revealed a detailed and horrifying account of rituals and ceremonies conducted in the mansion. The text described dark rites meant to summon and control malevolent spirits. The entries were filled with references to sacrifices and offerings made to appease the restless entities that haunted the mansion. One passage stood out, its ink smeared and barely legible. To calm the voices and secure the mansion, a ritual must be performed. The bones of the lost must be gathered and placed in the sacred room. Only then will the spirits be appeased? Emily's face paled as she read over my shoulder. "This is insane," she said. "These people were performing these rituals to control the spirits, and the bones, they must be the remains of those who didn't survive." The realization was chilling. The bones we had seen were not just remnants of the past. They were the remains of the mansion's former occupants, victims of the dark rituals meant to pacify the entities that now plagued us. As we absorbed this horrifying revelation, a cold draft swept through the room, making the bones clatter and rattle. The whispers returned, their voices now a cacophony of rage and despair. "You have found us," they wailed. "The ritual is incomplete. You must finish what was started." The walls seemed to close in, the oppressive presence of the spirits growing stronger. Shadows flickered across the room, taking on menacing shapes that danced in the corners of our vision. The sense of being watched became almost unbearable. Emily and I were paralyzed with fear, unable to tear ourselves away from the grim scene before us. The mansion was a prison of death and darkness, and the spirits were demanding something from us, something that we had yet to understand. We knew we had to leave the room, but as we turned to exit, the door slammed shut behind us with a deafening bang. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and the room's atmosphere became suffocating. The spirits were closing in, their demands growing more urgent. We were trapped with no clear path to escape the mansion's deadly grasp. As we frantically searched for a way out, the reality of our situation hit us with full force. The mansion's secrets were darker than we had ever imagined, and escaping its clutches would require more than just understanding its history. We had to confront the malevolent forces head-on, and time was running out. Our desperate struggle to escape the room of bones was futile. The door remained firmly shut, and the whispers grew louder, more chaotic. Emily and I huddled together, trying to make sense of our situation, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. As we searched for a way out, I noticed something unusual, a small, hidden panel in the wall, partially concealed behind a stack of bones. With a surge of hope, I pried it open, revealing a narrow, dusty passage. It seemed to lead further into the mansion, and I gestured for Emily to follow me. The passage was cramped and dark, but it led us to a larger, more elaborate room. The atmosphere in this new space was heavy with a palpable sense of history. The walls were lined with old portraits and faded tapestries, and the air was thick with the scent of incense and decay. As we entered, I noticed a series of old journals and ledgers scattered across a large wooden desk. The room appeared to be an office or study, and the walls were adorned with photographs of the mansion's former owner. A large ornate mirror stood at one end of the room, its surface covered in a layer of dust. Emily and I approached the desk, where I began to sift through the journals. The writing was elegant but erratic, revealing the thoughts and fears of the mansion's previous occupant. The entries were dated back to the late 1800s, detailing the construction and early history of the mansion. One journal in particular caught my attention. It was bound in dark leather and had an elaborate clasp. I carefully opened it, revealing pages filled with disturbing accounts and dark rituals. The entries detailed the former owner's descent into madness, driven by a relentless quest to control the spirits that haunted the mansion. As I read through the journal, a chilling narrative emerged. The former owner, a man named Charles Blackwood, had been obsessed with summoning and binding spirits to the mansion. He believed that by performing ancient rituals and sacrifices, he could control the malevolent entities that plagued the estate. The journal described how he had conducted numerous experiments, each more grotesque than the last, using human remains to fuel his dark rituals. In one particularly haunting entry, Blackwood wrote about his ultimate goal: to open a gateway to the spirit world and gain eternal life. He believed that by binding the spirits to the mansion, he could achieve his dark ambitions. The entry ended with a frantic scrawl: "The spirits are restless. The ritual must be completed. I must not fail." As I read these disturbing revelations, I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. The whispers in the mansion were not just random echoes. They were the voices of the spirits Blackwood had tried to control. His failure had condemned them to an eternity of torment, and now they were reaching out to us. Emily was looking at the portraits on the wall, her face pale with shock. "These are all pictures of Charles Blackwood," she said, pointing to a series of framed photographs. "He looks different in each one. It's like he's aging rapidly. I looked at the portraits and saw what she meant. In some photos, Blackwood appeared youthful and vigorous, while in others he looked gaunt and aged, his eyes hollow and haunted. The portraits seemed to capture his descent into madness. Beside the mirror, I noticed a hidden compartment in the wall. Inside there was a collection of old faded photographs and letters. The photographs depicted scenes of ceremonies and rituals, with Blackwood at the center, surrounded by others who looked fearful and desperate. One letter was addressed to the future inheritors, and it read, "To those who come after me, I have bound the spirits to this mansion, but my time is short. The ritual must be completed, or the spirits will never find peace. They demand a sacrifice to complete the binding and ensure their eternal torment. Do not attempt to break the bonds, or you will suffer the same fate as I, Charles Blackwood." The letter confirmed our worst fears. The mansion's malevolent presence was the result of Blackwood's failed rituals, and the spirits were demanding a final, horrifying act to complete the binding. As we absorbed this grim revelation, the whispers returned, their voices now a unified chant. "The time is near," they intoned. "The sacrifice must be made. Complete the ritual, or join us in torment." The mirror at the end of the room seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly light, and the shadows on the wall danced in eerie patterns. The feeling of being watched intensified, and the sense of dread grew stronger. The mansion was not just haunted, it was a prison for tormented souls, and we were caught in its dark web. Emily and I knew we had to find a way to escape, but the mansion's secrets were unfolding with terrifying clarity. The spirit's demands were growing more urgent, and time was running out. We had to confront the dark legacy of Charles Blackwood and uncover the truth behind the mansion's malevolent force before it was too late. The chilling revelations about Charles Blackwood's dark rituals weighed heavily on us as we tried to piece together our next move. The whispers continued to echo through the mansion, growing increasingly frantic and insistent. Our sense of impending doom deepened, and every corner of the mansion seemed to close in on us. Emily was visibly shaken, her eyes darting nervously around the room. The atmosphere in the study had become stifling, and the weight of Blackwood's dark legacy seemed to press down on us both. As I pored over the journals and letters, Emily's behavior grew more erratic. "I can't take it anymore," she muttered, pacing the room. "The voices, they're everywhere. They're telling me things." I looked up from the journal, concern etched on my face. "Emily, we need to stay focused. We need to figure out what to do next." But Emily's agitation only grew. She began to talk to herself, her voice rising in pitch. "They're watching us, they're waiting for us to fail. We're trapped and there's no way out." Her eyes were wild, and she seemed to be losing her grip on reality. The whispers in the mansion seemed to be affecting her more profoundly than they were affecting me. I tried to calm her down, but it was clear that she was spiraling. "Emily, listen to me," I said firmly, trying to get her attention. "We have to stay calm. We need to finish what we started and find a way out of here." But Emily's gaze was distant, as though she was seeing something I couldn't. "They're here," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They're in the walls. They're angry. They want us to suffer." The room seemed to grow darker, and the whispers grew louder, their urgency almost overwhelming. Emily's behavior became increasingly erratic. She began to scratch at the walls, her fingers bleeding from the effort. "We have to finish it," she screamed, her voice echoing through the mansion. "We have to make it right." I tried to restrain her, but she pulled away with a strength I hadn't seen before. Her eyes were wide and unblinking, and she seemed to be lost in a world of her own. The once quiet whispers had turned into a cacophony of voices, each one demanding something from us. In a moment of desperation, Emily grabbed a nearby candlestick and started smashing it against the walls. The sound of metal striking stone reverberated through the mansion, adding to the growing cacophony of noise. "Stop!" I shouted, trying to get through to her. Her eyes locked onto mine, but there was no recognition in them. "They're coming for us," she said, her voice barely audible. "We have to make a sacrifice. We have to appease them." I could see that Emily was no longer in control of her actions. The mansion's malevolent influence had taken a toll on her sanity, and I was terrified for her. I needed to get her out of the study and find help before things got worse. I managed to guide Emily out of the room, her movements sluggish and unsteady. The mansion seemed to conspire against us. with shadows shifting and whispering, making our escape all the more difficult. The atmosphere was thick with malevolence, and every step felt like we were sinking deeper into the mansion's dark grip. As we made our way through the corridors, Emily's muttering grew quieter, but her eyes remained wide and unfocused. Her descent into madness was almost complete, and I feared for her safety. The whispers in the walls seemed to grow louder and more aggressive, feeding off her instability. We finally reached the main hall, and I tried to get Emily to sit down and calm herself. She was barely responsive, her gaze vacant and distant. I looked around, hoping for some sign of escape, but the mansion seemed to have no intention of letting us go. In the midst of the chaos, I noticed a shadow moving in the corner of my eye. I turned to see a figure standing at the top of the stairs, a spectral apparition that seemed to be watching us with malevolent intent. Its presence only added to the overwhelming sense of dread. Desperation drove me to search the mansion for anything that could help us break free from this nightmarish cycle. I needed to find a way to reverse the ritual and free Emily from the mansion's grasp. But with each passing moment, the mansion seemed to grow darker and more oppressive. The whispers reached a fever pitch, their demands growing more insistent. Emily's condition was deteriorating rapidly, and I knew that time was running out. We had to find a way to appease the spirits and escape the mansion before it consumed us completely. Emily's condition was deteriorating rapidly. Her behavior had become increasingly erratic, her movements disjointed, and her eyes filled with a haunting, vacant look. Despite my attempts to comfort her, it was clear that the mansion's malevolent force had taken a deep hold on her sanity. We were huddled in the main hall, the once grand room now shrouded in oppressive darkness. The whispers in the walls seemed to have grown more insistent, their voices blending into a constant, eerie hum. Emily's ramblings were becoming incoherent, and she frequently stared off into the distance, as if seeing something I couldn't. At one point, Emily suddenly stiffened and let out a low, guttural moan. Her eyes widened in terror as she pointed towards the top of the grand staircase. "He's here," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Charles Blackwood. I see him." I turned to look, but the top of the stairs was empty. The shadows seemed to dance and shift, but there was no sign of anyone or anything there. I tried to calm Emily, but she was unresponsive, her gaze fixed on the stairway. "He's watching us," Emily continued, her voice filled with dread. "He's angry. He wants us to pay." I could see the fear in her eyes, and my heart ached for her. It was clear that the mansion's dark presence was manifesting in her mind, feeding her delusions. I needed to find a way to help her, but the mansion itself seemed to be working against us. Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped, and a chilling breeze swept through, causing the curtains to flutter and the chandelier to sway. The whispers intensified, their voices growing louder and more distorted. Emily's eyes darted around the room as though searching for something. "Look!" she cried out, pointing again at the top of the stairs. "He's coming!" I squinted into the darkness, and this time, I thought I saw a figure materializing at the top of the stairs. It was a tall, gaunt man, dressed in old-fashioned clothing. His face was obscured by shadows, but his presence was unmistakably malevolent. The figure moved with a slow, deliberate grace, its gaze fixed on us. Emily's reaction was immediate. She recoiled, her body shaking with fear. "He's coming for us. We have to leave, we have to—" Before she could finish, the figure began to descend the stairs, its movements fluid and almost spectral. As it drew closer, I could see the cold, hollow eyes of Charles Blackwood staring down at us. His expression was one of unrelenting anger, and his presence radiated a palpable sense of dread. I grabbed Emily, trying to pull her away from the stairs. "Emily, we need to get out of here. We need to find a way to escape." But Emily was frozen in place, her eyes locked onto the ghostly figure. "He's trapped," she said in a trance-like state. "He can't leave. He's bound here, just like the others. He's angry because we're trying to break the cycle." The figure reached the bottom of the stairs and began to move towards us, its footsteps echoing ominously through the hall. The whispers grew louder, their voices blending into a deafening roar. The mansion seemed to close in on us, the walls pulsating with a dark energy. I could feel the oppressive weight of the mansion's presence pressing down on us, and I knew we had to act quickly. The figure of Charles Blackwood was a manifestation of the mansion's malevolence, and his appearance was a sign that we were running out of time. Desperation drove me to search for anything that could help us. I grabbed one of the old tomes from the study and began flipping through its pages, hoping to find something that could offer a solution. The book was filled with arcane symbols and rituals, and I could feel the dark energy radiating from it. Emily's condition continued to worsen. She was muttering incoherently, her eyes wide with terror. The presence of Blackwood seemed to be overwhelming her, and I could see that she was barely holding on to her sanity. As the figure of Charles Blackwood approached, the whispers reached a fever pitch, their demands growing more insistent. The mansion was a prison of darkness and despair, and the spirits were demanding something from us, something that we still didn't fully understand. I knew that we had to complete the ritual to appease the spirits and break the cycle of torment. But with Emily's sanity slipping away and the mansion's malevolent force closing in on us, the task seemed almost insurmountable. We had to find a way to confront the dark legacy of Charles Blackwood and escape the mansion's clutches before it was too late. The oppressive atmosphere of the mansion seemed to close in on us as we confronted the apparition of Charles Blackwood. Emily's condition was deteriorating rapidly, her sanity slipping away with each passing moment. The figure of Blackwood loomed ominously at the top of the stairs, its presence a tangible weight that seemed. Her eyes were wild, and her behavior was becoming increasingly disturbing. She started tearing at her hair with frantic intensity, her fingers clawing at the strands as if trying to rip them from her scalp. The sight was both heartbreaking and horrifying. Her face was contorted with fear and anguish, and the pain she was inflicting upon herself was evident in her pained, "Emily, stop!" I pleaded, trying to reach her. "You need to calm down. But Emily was beyond reason. She continued to pull at her hair, her sobs mingling with the whispers that filled the mansion. Her fingers were stained with blood as she scratched at the walls, her nails digging into the old decaying plaster until they bled. The walls seemed to respond to her. The room was filled with a chaotic mixture of sounds, the frantic scratching of Emily's nails, the eerie whispers, and the occasional Emily's once beautiful hands were now smeared with blood and grime as she continued her destructive behavior. She scratched at the walls with increasing desperation, her movements becoming erratic and unco. Her skin was raw and bleeding from her relentless scratching, and her eyes were sunken and hollow. The whispers in the walls seemed to be growing more chaotic, their demands blending into a cacophony of noise. The room felt like it was closing in, the walls seeming to pulse with a dark, rhythmic energy. In a moment of sheer panic, I grabbed Emily's shoulders and tried to pull her away from the walls. "Emily, please, you're hurting yourself. We need to get out of here and find a way to break this cycle." But she resisted, her strength seemingly fueled by the madness that had taken hold of her. "No!" she screamed, her voice a piercing shriek. "I can't stop. I have to—" Before she could finish, she collapsed to the floor, her body trembling uncontrollably. Her hair was a tangled mess of blood and sweat, and her skin was covered in scratches and bruises. The room was filled with the metallic tang of blood and the overwhelming stench of decay. I knelt beside her, my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to comfort her, my own fear and desperation mingling with my concern for her well-being. The whispers seemed to be converging on us, their voices a chaotic blur of demands and threats. The figure of Charles Blackwood continued to watch us from the top of the stairs, its expression unreadable. The atmosphere was suffocating, and it felt as though the mansion itself was drawing closer, its dark energy closing in around us. I needed to act quickly. The mansion was feeding off Emily's distress, and the whispers were becoming more insistent. We had to complete the ritual to appease the spirits and end the cycle of torment. But with Emily in such a fragile state, I wasn't sure how we could proceed. As I tried to tend to Emily, I noticed that the room's temperature had dropped significantly, and a cold draft swept through, causing the blood on the walls to congeal and freeze. The whispers grew louder, their demands now a deafening roar. I knew we had to confront the dark legacy of Charles Blackwood and find a way to complete the ritual. But with Emily's condition worsening and the mansion's malevolent force closing in on us, the task seemed almost insurmountable. The spirits were growing more agitated, and time was running out. With a heavy heart and a sense of grim determination, I resolved to find a way to end the mansion's torment. I had to uncover the final pieces of the ritual and escape before it consumed us both. The stakes were higher than ever, and the mansion's dark grip seemed tighter with each passing moment. The mansion's oppressive grip tightened as Emily's condition reached its breaking point. With every ounce of strength I had left, I focused on the task at hand, completing the ritual to appease the spirits and end the nightmare that had consumed us. The whispers had become a relentless cacophony, their demands growing more frantic and insistent. I carefully followed the instructions from the old tomes we had found, piecing together the fragments of the ritual that Charles Blackwood had left behind. The atmosphere in the mansion was heavy with dark energy, and the sense of urgency was palpable. The figure of Blackwood still loomed at the top of the stairs, its presence a constant reminder of the stakes. With trembling hands, I performed the final steps of the ritual, reciting the ancient incantations and making the necessary offerings. The room seemed to pulse with a dark energy as the ritual reached its climax. The whispers grew louder, their voices blending into a deafening roar. As I completed the final incantation, a surge of energy swept through the mansion. The walls seemed to tremble, and a cold wind howled through the corridors. The figure of Charles Blackwood flickered and then vanished, the oppressive atmosphere lifting slightly as the spirit's demands were met. The mansion's malevolent presence seemed to recede, and the whispers faded into an eerie silence. For a moment, there was a sense of relief, a glimmer of hope that the nightmare might finally be over. But the toll on Emily had been immense. Her descent into madness had left her fragile and broken. Her eyes were vacant, and her behavior was erratic and disoriented. Despite my best efforts to help her, it was clear that she was beyond my ability to save. We were eventually rescued from the mansion by emergency responders, but the damage had been done. Emily was taken to a psychiatric hospital, her mind shattered by the horrors she had endured. The doctors tried to help her, but the experiences had left deep scars that would never fully heal. The once bright spark in Emily's eyes had dimmed, replaced by a haunted, distant look. She would never be able to look at the world with normal eyes again. The trauma of the mansion's dark influence had irrevocably changed her, and she was now trapped in a world of her own making. I visited her as often as I could, but each encounter was heart-wrenching. She was unresponsive and lost in her own thoughts, her once vibrant personality overshadowed by the darkness that had consumed her. The mansion's malevolent force had claimed its final victory, leaving behind only shattered lives and unfulfilled promises. The mansion itself was eventually abandoned, its dark legacy fading into obscurity. The authorities never fully understood the true nature of the horrors that had occurred within its walls. The whispers that once echoed through its corridors were now silent, but the memory of the nightmare lingered, a haunting reminder of the darkness that had claimed us. As I left the psychiatric hospital for the final time, I couldn't shake the feeling of guilt and despair. I had hoped that by completing the ritual, we could escape the mansion's grip and find a measure of peace. But the cost had been far greater than I had ever imagined. Emily's fate was a constant reminder of the mansion's dark power, and the scars it had left on both of us would never fully heal. The mansion's secrets had been uncovered, but at a terrible price. The echoes of its dark past would forever haunt me, a chilling reminder of the depths of human despair and the inescapable grip of evil.